Should the Houston Texans use their franchise tag? And if they decide to use it, which players should they use it on? Welcome into the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans. Let's talk about should the Texans use their franchise tag this offseason. I've got my green shirt on because the franchise tag means big money. If you're unfamiliar with what the franchise tag is, every team gets one. They don't have to use it each offseason. They give it to a player that is headed to free agency. It keeps them from going to free agency, and it pays them either 120% of their previous year's salary, or it pays them the top 5 of the players at their positions salary averaged out. And it's typically the top 5 because they get paid whatever is higher. Now, the Texans have a handful of free agents, but there's really only 2 free agents that they should consider using the franchise tag on. One on defense, one on offense. The defensive player, defensive end Jonathan Greenard. The offensive player, tight end Dalton Schultz. So let's talk a little bit about each of these players and figure out by the end, should the Texans use the franchise tag on Greenard or Schultz? Overthecap.com has the projected franchise tag numbers for us. So if you look at this, the projected franchise tag number for a defensive end is $20.2 million. Now, that franchise tag is fully guaranteed for 1 year. So $20.2 million right onto the salary cap if the Texans decide to franchise tag Jonathan Greenard. So when you're thinking about the franchise tag, a lot of times it's bad for players. For Greenard, it would actually be a really, really good thing for him and his side in the negotiation of a long-term contract. One, Greenard's made under $5 million in his career. So to get to $20 million fully guaranteed for 1 season, that's a huge financial gain. But the important aspect of the tag for Jonathan Greenard is it raises the base and the starting point of the negotiation and the conversation about a long-term deal. If the Texans would tell you that he's worth, at the very least, $20.2 million over the course of 1 year, then when Greenard goes for a contract extension, he has every right to say, well, look, you told me I'm worth $20 million a year. Let's start there. Let's start at $20 million a year. And most contract projections don't have Greenard anywhere near that. In fact, a lot of contract projections have his expected guaranteed money just slightly higher than what the franchise tag actually guarantees him for 1 year. Those projections are over multiple years. So the tag would be great for Jonathan Greenard. It gives him and his side a really high base to start working off of when it comes to guaranteed money over the course of the contract, when it comes to the average annual value of the contract. And so for a large part of that, that's why it doesn't make sense for the Texans. The Texans not only would have a tougher time negotiating an extension with Greenard, because you could negotiate a multi-year extension with franchise players up to the middle of the summer. So it'd give them a tougher negotiation with Greenard, and it would limit what they can do around the rest of free agency and signing other players. The franchise tag immediately goes on to your cap as it's a fully guaranteed 1-year contract figure. So the Texans, right off the bat, that big cap space that they've got this offseason, chop off over $20 million if you franchise tag Jonathan Greenard. Now, you're saying to yourself, well, Cody, what about Chris Jones or Justin Madubuike or some of these other big-time players in free agency? Don't they cost even more than that? Won't that be just how it happens? Well, just because a guy has a high average annual value doesn't mean that that number's right away coming off of the salary cap. It's a lot of manipulation and changing that you can do with multi-year contracts. There's no manipulation with the franchise tag. It's 1 year. It's fully guaranteed. Now, of course, you can negotiate a new contract, but as we talked about, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Texans to tag Greenard. It puts them at a disadvantage in negotiating with Greenard, and it puts them at a disadvantage in their maneuverability with their salary cap space. So I'll say no franchise tag for Jonathan Greenard, though keeping him away from free agency and a bidding war with another team that might be desperate for a guy like Jonathan Greenard, who has the most sacks of any defensive end free agent in this free agency class. That would be a positive, keeping him away from the bidding war, but you can just go ahead and try to win the bidding war with your own contract or get the deal done before he hits free agency if you really want Jonathan Grenard back and you're the Houston Texans. Now, flipping over to offense, a player where it does make a little sense to think about the franchise tag is Dalton Schultz. We head back to overthecap.com to check out that tight end number. Just over $12 million is the number for tight ends, if Dalton Schultz got the franchise tag. Now, he made just over $6 million last year. So it is double what he made last year for the most part, just under double what he made last year. So it seems like a hefty investment. But for Dalton Schultz and where he is with the Texans, how important he is to the team and the offense, and the lack of available options to replace exactly what he brings to the table, it's a worthwhile conversation. There's not any free agent who's as close to as good as Dalton Schultz. The closest one is Hunter Henry, and I like Dalton Schultz a whole heck of a lot more than Hunter Henry. And yes, this is a pretty solid draft class when it comes to tight ends, but having, say, Brevin Jordan, Team Quintariano, and a rookie at the tight end spot, that doesn't sit as well with me as paying Dalton Schultz. Now, again, the $12 million plus that Dalton Schultz would get on the franchise tag, that goes right to your salary cap. You chop off $12 million off of your maneuverability, but it's a lot easier to maneuver around $12 million than the $20 million plus that Jonathan Grenard would cost. It's still not great because with Dalton Schultz's contract, you could very easily see a 2-3 year commitment where the guaranteed money is not tough to deal with over the course of that contract, and you can keep that initial contract and the initial cap hit low if you want to continue to spend and allocate some of that money elsewhere. I would talk with Schultz if I was the Texans about trying to get a deal done. I'd even be willing to go into the double digits per year, $10, $11 million per year, a variable amount of how much of that is guaranteed. Maybe it's a 2-year commitment. Maybe it's a 3-year commitment. But he's one of the most productive tight ends in football over the past 4 seasons. When you hear C.J. Stroud talk about him, Stroud clearly likes Dalton Schultz. He was a key piece to the offense last year. There's no reason to believe, even if you add some talent at wide receiver, that Schultz couldn't be a key piece again for this team. Yeah, the blocking's not great. People will remember the playoff drops, but he only had 4 drops all season long. I like Dalton Schultz. I'd invest in him ahead of free agency. And if I couldn't get a deal done as the Texans, I would think about franchise tagging him because, again, he is by far the best tight end that is set to hit free agency. And when you look at how teams succeed in the NFL, the final 4 teams left in this deal this past year all had really good tight end play. Mark Andrews for the Ravens, Travis Kelce for the Kansas City Chiefs, Sam Laporta for the Detroit Lions, and George Kittle for the San Francisco 49ers. Good tight end play, usually a hallmark of a good offense and a good team. Keeping Dalton Schultz would be a big-time priority. I wouldn't let him hit free agency, and if I had to use the franchise tag to do so, I would do that. But ultimately, I feel like the Texans can come to an agreement with Dalton Schultz and get him re-signed prior to free agency so they don't have to use that franchise tag, which means they've got a franchise tag still. Nothing on the Grenard, nothing on Dalton Schultz. Let's take a look at some of these other contract figures. Well, they don't need a quarterback. They're not going to franchise tag Blake Cashman. Sheldon Rankins is not worth almost $21 million on the franchise tag. You could let him get away. Steven Nelson, nice player, not franchise tag worthy. You're not spending almost $19 million on him. Even Devin Singletary, be nice to make sure he's back, even if it's just a 1-year deal, but over $11 million for Devin Singletary at the running back spot. That's not going to work out. Looking at here at the special teams, at just over $5.6 million, that would be a slight raise for Kaimi Fairbairn, the kicker for the Texans who's set to hit free agency. And if you could franchise tag Kaimi Fairbairn, I believe the team should. Here's the problem. The team can't franchise tag Kaimi Fairbairn. Sometimes players put in contract extensions or contract renegotiations, that they are not allowed to be franchise tagged when that contract expires. Fairbairn has such a clause in his expiring contract, so the team can't use the franchise tag on Ka'imi Fairbairn. If they could, that's who I would franchise tag if I was the Texans, but they can't. So ultimately, as this offseason gets going, I don't believe the Texans will or should use their franchise tag, but they should be talking to Dalton Schultz about a contract extension. They'd try to get Jonathan Grenard, or should try to get Jonathan Grenard under a deal, and maybe even, because they can't tag Ka'imi Fairbairn, talk with him about bringing him back. In the regular season, he only missed 2 kicks all year long. Now, one of them was enormous and almost cost the Texans the AFC South, and then he missed the kick in the playoffs against the Ravens. That's in the back of my mind, and maybe even in the front of my mind when I think about Fairbairn, but he's super efficient. Try to extend him, because you can't franchise tag him. What'd you think? Should the Texans use the franchise tag on Grenard or Schultz? Should they try to extend them? What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. On your way down to the comment section, throw me a thumbs up on the video and visit with our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy, the best way to play fantasy. And you're saying, Cody, fantasy football's over. Well, you can already start drafting best ball drafts for next year, and Underdog's Pick'em is still live. Higher or lower on predicted stats for basketball, baseball's right around the corner. Put it together. It's very simple. 5 entries, you could 20 times, 5 predictions, you could 20 times your money in just one entry. It's so easy to use. You get started for just $10, and when you make that first deposit with Underdog Fantasy at my link in the description down below, you're going to get that first deposit doubled. That's right. 10 turns into 20, 20 turns into 40. You can put 50, turn it into 100. You can go up to $100, turn $100 into 200, and you can really play with the Underdog Fantasy Pick'em. You can put in as little as $1 in an entry as well. Turn $1 into 20, and next thing you know, you're having a blast with our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Appreciate you watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. I would franchise tag you if I could for watching this late in the video. You can franchise tag me by throwing a thumbs up on the video and subscribing to the channel. And I promise I won't ever be as corny as I just was ever again. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. And I can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.